Your iPhone will be forgotten in a decade, bricked by software, tossed in a drawer, junk in a landfill. 2,000 years ago, the ancient Greeks built a computer from bronze. So precise it still revealed its secrets after centuries at the bottom of the Mediterranean. Why did their lost technology endure, while ours is designed to disappear? This is the 2,000-year-old computer that makes your iPhone look pathetic. And the truth waiting inside will rewrite everything you thought you knew about progress. In the spring of 1900, a battered wooden ship rested on the seafloor near Antikythera, 40 to 50 meters down, far deeper than any sponge diver's comfort zone. The water pressed in from all sides, cold and silent, as men in canvas suits and copper helmets descended on lifelines from the deck of the Mycale, a Greek Navy support ship. The divers worked with hand-pumped air, each breath a gamble. They moved through a graveyard of marble limbs and bronze torsos, the remains of a Roman-era cargo that had been lost for nearly 2,000 years. One diver, Elias surfaced wild-eyed, babbling about corpses and horses scattered across the bottom. The captain doubted him at first, blaming the bends. But the men went back down, drawn by the promise of treasure and the orders of their Navy handlers. The risk was real. At that depth, every minute invited disaster. One diver, Dimitrios Kondos, never made it back alive. Others came up bent and shaking, their bodies twisted by nitrogen bubbles. The Mycale's logbooks recorded the growing toll. Rescue attempts, emergency halts, arguments between Navy officers and the sponge divers about how much danger was too much. Still, the work continued. Statues and amphorae broke the surface first, hoisted onto the deck under the eyes of government officials. Bronze horses, marble gods, coins, and jewelry, all catalogued and packed for Athens. The divers kept pulling up more, sometimes working blind in the silt, feeling for shapes in the mud. Among the haul was a lump no bigger than a shoebox, wood fused with corroded bronze, almost unrecognizable. It crumbled at the edges, leaving green dust on the deck. By the time it reached the National Archaeological Museum in Athens in 1901, the artifact looked like scrap. Curators set it aside, focused on statues and gold. The lump sat ignored, its secrets locked inside, while the world marveled at the more obvious treasures. No one guessed that the most important find from the wreck was the one that seemed least worth saving. For nearly 70 years, the lump sat in a museum drawer. Forgotten, misjudged, its surface flaking away a little more each decade. Curators labeled it as scrap, a curiosity at best. The real treasures, everyone thought, were the statues and coins. But in 1971, a British physicist named Derek de Solla Price arrived in Athens with a different agenda. Price had spent years studying the history of science, and he was convinced that the battered artifact was hiding something extraordinary. He pushed for permission to use X-ray and gamma-ray imaging, then cutting-edge technology, to peer inside the corroded bronze without destroying it. The museum staff was wary. The mechanism was fragile, the metal fused with ancient wood, and the risk of shattering it was real. But Price persisted, negotiating access and promising to share his findings. In a small, tense lab, technicians carefully positioned the fragments under the X-ray machine. The first images flickered onto the screen, grainy, ghostly shadows revealing a maze of shapes within the lump. What they saw defied belief. Inside the artifact were rows of interlocking bronze gears, some barely thicker than a thumbnail, each tooth carved with astonishing precision. Not just one or two, but nearly 30 gears, layered, aligned, connected in ways no one had imagined possible for the ancient world. Wheels within wheels, each one meshing perfectly with the next. Price later described it as finding a jet plane in the tomb of Tutankhamun. The shock in the room was immediate. For decades, the artifact had been dismissed as a corroded oddity. Now it was clear. This was a machine, and not just any machine. The complexity rivaled anything built in Europe until the late medieval era. The gears were cut so finely that modern engineers looking at the X-rays struggled to believe they were made by hand without lathes or power tools. The revelation forced everyone to rethink what ancient technology could achieve. If the Greeks could build something this intricate, what else had been lost to time? The Antikythera Mechanism had survived centuries underwater and decades of neglect, yet its inner workings were still waiting to be understood. Price's X-rays didn't just reveal a mechanism, they opened a door to a forgotten chapter in human ingenuity. In a world obsessed with the next upgrade, the image of those ancient gears, still locked in place after 2,000 years, stood as a quiet rebuke. Sometimes the future is hidden inside the past, waiting for the right person to look closely enough. Turn the crank, and the cosmos comes alive in bronze. The Antikythera Mechanism transforms human curiosity into moving metal, each gear translating the sky's hidden rhythms into something you can see and touch. The front dial is a map of the heavens. Greek zodiac, Egyptian calendar, pointers for the sun and moon. Every tooth on every wheel is cut to match a cycle above. The turning of years, the waxing and waning of the moon, the dance of eclipses. Inside, the gears do more than keep time. They predict it. The metonic dial on the back encodes a pattern that links lunar months to solar years. 19 years, 235 lunar cycles, all tracked by a single spiral groove. Next to it, the Saros dial marks out the eclipse cycle. 18 years, 11 days, 223 lunar months, all counted by the slow, relentless turning of bronze. Ancient astronomers knew these cycles from centuries of watching the sky. The mechanism engraves them in metal, making the invisible regular. Even the moon's odd behavior, speeding up, slowing down, never quite matching the calendar, is solved by a gear within a gear, the world's first epicyclic drive. A pin rides in a slot, wobbling as it goes, giving the moon pointer a subtle back and forth, just as the real moon seems to hesitate and surge. This is not just craftsmanship, but a physical model of the universe's complexity, built by hands that understood both mathematics and metal. 30 gears, each one meshing with the next, each one a silent record of knowledge carried forward from teacher to apprentice, from workshop to workshop. The sky, rendered mechanical and made predictable, 2,000 years before anyone else would even attempt it. Bronze gears, hand-cut 2,000 years ago, still hold their shape. The knowledge they carry survived shipwreck, salt water, and centuries of neglect. But the workshops that made them? Gone. Not a single tool bench, blueprint, or apprentice's notebook remains. The skills needed to build the Antikythera Mechanism vanished when empires fell and libraries burned. Alexandria's scrolls turned to ash. Generations of craftsmen and mathematicians disappeared, their secrets lost in the chaos of war and collapse. All that's left is a battered machine and the ghost of a tradition we can only guess at. Now compare that to today. We store our lives in the cloud, photos, messages, even medical records, on servers humming in distant warehouses. But those servers need power, cooling, and companies to keep them alive. A single bankruptcy, blackout, or cyber attack, and whole archives can vanish overnight. Planned obsolescence is built into everything from phones to laptops. Devices are designed to fail, to be replaced, to become e-waste in just a few years. 5 billion smartphones were thrown away in 2022. Most will outlast their owners only as plastic pollution, not as vessels of knowledge. Yet there are people trying to bridge the gap. Modern engineers and makers spend years building replicas of the Antikythera Mechanism, learning lost skills by trial and error. Some describe the moment their first gear assembly turns as a revelation, a glimpse into an ancient world where permanence mattered. But these efforts are rare. For the most part, we've traded endurance for convenience, legacy for upgrade cycles. The Greeks built for the ages, we build for the quarter. And every time a server farm shuts down or a device bricks itself, we lose a little more of what might have lasted. In 1901, divers recovered the Antikythera Mechanism from a shipwreck nearly 50 meters beneath the Mediterranean. an artifact that had survived over 2,000 years underwater. X-ray images in 1971 revealed around 30 interlocking bronze gears, demonstrating a level of mechanical precision not matched in Europe for centuries. The device accurately encoded astronomical cycles like the 19-year Metonic and 18-year Saros, all without modern tools. Yet despite extensive study, no other mechanism of its kind has ever been found, and the identity of its creators remains unknown. Most ancient technical texts and devices were lost to time, erased by war and decay. Today, our digital records depend on fragile infrastructure that can vanish within decades if neglected. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as evidence that knowledge, once carefully built and preserved, can outlast empires. What endures is not just technology, but the intention to create for the future.